The government of Pedro Sánchez holds in its hands the future of three Supreme Court judges who are judging the Koldo case. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares after Holy Week. I hope you're all doing well, that you've been able to get some rest even if just for a few days, and that we all gather our strength together because the truth is, this April, Medidas Cautelares is going to have an extremely intense month. Myself and all of you, because we're going to have a lot of information, a lot of major legal news, starting with the famous trial of the Koldo case, which begins tomorrow at the Supreme Court. So we won't even be able to catch our breath for a second with all the information we're going to have this April. An April that is going to be very intense and certainly very bad as well for the interest of Pedro Sanchez's government. And today we're going to talk about some information that I consider very concerning, and we're going to share it on screen as we always do. By the way, if you haven't done it yet, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel. As you know, we're on our way to 150,000 subscribers. Without you, this wouldn't make sense. And we already have this very important and serious information on screen. Here you have an image of some justices of the Supreme Court. Among them, you can see with the microphone the president of the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court, Andres Martinez Arriete, and to his right, Justice Manuel Marchena, who was his predecessor as president of the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court. And Marchena was replaced, let's say, after completing his 2 terms as president of the criminal chamber by Martinez Arrieta. And precisely, we are going to talk about the justices of the Supreme Court and about some other judge. Because pay attention, Pedro Sanchez's government holds in its hands the future of 3 Supreme Court justices who will judge the Koldo case. This is about Andres Martinez Arrieta, president of the criminal chamber. Justices Julian Sanchez Melgar and Andres Palomo, who would have to retire between this year and the next after turning 72 years old. The socialist executive, led by the Minister of Justice Felix Bolaños, is preparing a reform of the organic law of the judiciary that would raise the retirement age to 75 years old. Martinez Arrieta, Sanchez Melgar, and Palomo are part of the court that will try the former Minister of Transport starting this Tuesday. José Luis Ábalos, his former advisor Koldo Garcia, and the businessman Victor Daldama in the High Court. Judges Manuel Marchena, Susana Polo, Eduardo de Porres, and Javier Hernández are the other members who make up that court. You already know there are 7 judges in total. Well, the legal sources we have consulted at Medidas Cautelares and Libertad Digital state that Felix Bolaños has put this reform of the judges' retirement age on hold until Judge Juan Carlos Peinado, head of Madrid's investigating court number 41, who is investigating the Begoña Gómez case. That is the case of the wife of the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, who is facing charges for 5 crimes. Will retire next September when he turns 72 years old. That is, the government does not want to approve the extension of the retirement age for judges from 72 to 75, an extra 3 years, until Judge Peinado turns 72 this September. And retires because, as you know, Judge Peinado has become, let's say, the main adversary of Pedro Sanchez's government with this Begoña Gómez case. And until he retires, they don't want to implement that reform they are preparing for the organic law of the judiciary. The Supreme Court Judge Andres Palomo has to retire in the coming months and in principle would not benefit from the government's extension of the retirement age, although he could be proposed for another term. The consensus judge in a possible renewal of the Constitutional Court, something that I currently see as complicated because it requires an agreement between the PSOE and the PP, and the PP has already said that they are not willing to renew the Constitutional Court. You already know that one of those who would have to leave is Cándido Conde Pumpido, the president, and what the PP has said is that as of today, we are not going to make any deals, we are not going to reach any agreement to renew the Constitutional Court with Pedro Sanchez's government. It should be noted that last July, when forming the appeals chamber of the Supreme Court in the case of the then Prosecutor General, Álvaro García Ortiz, Judge Andres Palomo submitted a dissenting opinion against his prosecution, the prosecution of García Ortiz. emphasizing that it was not possible to attribute in any minimally justified way the leak concerning the boyfriend of the Madrid president, Isabel Díaz Ayuso, Alberto González Amador. That's what Judge Andrés Palomo said in a dissenting opinion. You already know that in the end, Alberto González Amador ended up being convicted by the Supreme Court. Well, the same legal sources consulted emphasized that the legal reform could indeed benefit the current president of the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court, Andrés Martínez Arrieta, who will turn 72 in April 2027, that is, next year. Martínez Arrieta is considered an independent left-wing judge, and his stance on the October 1st amnesty law, refusing to include the crime of embezzlement committed by the fugitive former Catalan president Carles Puigdemont, was not well received by the socialist government. Last July, the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court agreed to dismiss the recent referral sent by Judge Peinado against Bolaños, in which he requested his indictment for the crimes of perjury and embezzlement, in the context of the Begoña Gómez case, with the report by Martínez Arrieta himself. In other words, Martínez Arrieta. Well, he has shown himself, let's say, firm on the issue of the amnesty law, refusing to include the crime of embezzlement committed by Puigdemont under the amnesty. But on the other hand, last June, well, a report by Martínez Arrieta, that opinion was used to file away Judge Peinado's recent statement in which he requested to charge the Minister of Justice, Félix Bolaños, another one of the magistrates, que podría ser independent leftist, and his amnesty law by Julian Sánchez Melgar, who is also going to judge the case against Koldo. And as I said, he could benefit from that extension of the retirement age that the government is preparing, since he turns 72 in September of next year, 2027. Remember, Sánchez Melgar was Attorney General in the government's final months. Del Partido Popular de Rajoy en julio del año of Supreme Court Justice Marco Martínez Arrieta, fiscal general del Estado García Martínez Arrieta, considered an independent leftist judge, or affected, whatever you want to call it, by this possible amnesty in April, and that he has kept on hold until Peinado leaves. There would also be other magistrates from the Supreme Court itself who could be affected, among them the current president of the Administrative Litigation Chamber. Martínez, considered for amnesty, would have his birthday in April or in the month of June. However, just like Andrés Palomo, it is most likely that this reform will not affect him if the executive does not intend to implement it until Judge Peinado retires in September. That is next year. In the month of September, and this magistrate, Pablo Lucas, since he has to retire in July, obviously it would not benefit him. They will also turn 72 years old during 2026. Other important magistrates from the Supreme Court's criminal chamber, such as Juan Ramón Verduga and Ángel Hurtado. Juan Ramón Martínez, considered an independent leftist magistrate and a supporter of the coup plotters law of October 1st, and Ángel Hurtado, has been the magistrate. He would have his birthday in April. That is to say, from Pedro Sánchez's government, Álvaro García Ortiz, yes, from Pedro Sánchez's government. Because the office of the Attorney General, since Pedro Sánchez arrived, has been more manipulated than ever. It's now the Attorney General's office under Pedro Sánchez's government, not the State Attorney General's office. Martínez Arrieta, an independent leftist magistrate, his position on the law, Álvaro García Ortiz. And just to remind you exactly what the law says, well, Article 386 of the Organic Law of the Judiciary would reach that age in April. That is to say, que la jubilación por edad. Martínez Arrieta, an independent leftist magistrate, his position on the amnesty law, would turn 70 years old. However, they may request an extension of their active service until they reach a maximum of 72 years old in April. To say, this request is binding for the General Counsel of the Judiciary, CGPJ, which can only deny it if the age requirement or the 2-month advance notice requirement is not met. That's how things are. And honestly, the situation is concerning for me. Martínez, Supreme Court judge, who has to start judging as of tomorrow. Well, the one who was Pedro Sánchez's right-hand man, José Luis Ábalos, both in the government and in the Socialist Party itself. Well, honestly, I don't like that three Supreme Court judges' future depends on the amnesty law. Abril de Martinez considered to hold position A regarding the organic law of the judiciary, which provides for extending the retirement age. Because, of course, if this law goes through, they could remain judges for 3 more years. And I suppose that most of them would have their birthdays in April, that is to say, this year. Pedro Sanchez's government, which is going to be tried for the first time for a corruption scheme. Martinez Arrieta holds in his hands the future of no less than 3 of the 7 judges. Leftist issue, for me, it's a worrying stance, it's a concern, but my duty is to put this on the table, okay? So that you always have all the information. I mean, because that's what this is about, and that's the main goal here. On this Medidas Cautelares channel, by the way, I have to tell you that yours truly will be there tomorrow. Martinez Arrieta, considered someone in favor of the amnesty code. I also have to tell you that some of you were asking me years ago in April, do I have to tell you no? There will be a television signal for those of us who are there at the Supreme Court so we can cover it, but it will not be broadcast. Yeah. Just like the Supreme Court did with the trial of the first, which all the media outlets had access to. Well, direct access to the entire trial from beginning to end. This is not going to happen in this trial. Martinez Arrieta, considered an independent leftist judge. His position, the statements, recordings released by the media. He would have his birthday in April, retransmitiendo en directo todas las sesiones desde el principio. Year. Until the end, of course, on Medidas Cautelares. We will tell you the most important things that happen in those. Martinez Arrieta, what's your stance on amnesty? Would it be fulfilled in April? For example, the trial of Operation Kitchen, where there will be very important, very interesting statements. Also, for that case of espionage against the former PP treasurer, Luis Bárcenas, supposedly carried out by some police officers on orders from Mariano Rajoy's government. And there will also be a need to provide information about the most important statements. And you'll have all of that here on Medidas Cautelares. Martinez Arrieta considered a stance. The amnesty would have an anniversary. Videos that are now greatly favored by YouTube's algorithm. Videos in which users are very happy with the content, with the video. That is to say, hay que expresar esa alegría. Yeah. Very well, that gratitude with this information, with these videos, well, with lots of likes, sharing it, hitting the like button, leaving your comments, interacting. I know that nothing. Martinez Arrieta, considered for amnesty, would have a birthday. By commenting, liking, subscribing to the Medidas Cautelares channel, or becoming a member, you support us. And it costs less than €3 a day. I mean a year. For €7 a month, you can also make contributions via Bizum to line 627. Martinez Arrieta is considered an independent leftist judge, and his stance on the amnesty law would be different in April. And that it had been a while since he did. 2027, that is to say, by buying the official Medidas Cautelares products during this Holy Week, many orders have come in. Thank you all very much for your trust and for continuing to support this Medidas Cautelares channel with its products. You already know that you have mugs, you have cases for headphones, for AirPods. Martinez Arrieta, considered an independent leftist, and his stance on amnesty would coincide with years of different slogans. You also even have towels, different sports bags, mugs of all sizes and so on, and of course sweatshirts as well. Martinez Arrieta, considered independent, his stance. The one that's, let's say, the crown jewel is the Medidas Cautelares Information is Power mug, and it sells a lot. So, here you can place your orders, and it's also another way to support this Medidas Cautelares channel so we can keep going strong. Most importantly, as I always say, this information reaches everyone because Martinez believes it fulfills its purpose. Hasta pronto.